Hey, welcome back. Battery died on me last time. So I think we're sufficiently charged to cover the rest of the Urban Express experiment. I should go back to the carburetor for a quick second. So that is the SHA clone carburetor. Um, this little black uh, adapter that you see is the MLM intake adapter so that you can run an SHA carb. And that's a clone carb I got for like $15 or $16. It's running a 75 jet. I don't think you can get this particular adapter anymore. They've gone to one that's longer and curved, so it actually sticks the carburetor out in a better position to access it. But the nice thing about either one of the adapters is you don't have to undo these nuts and bolts to take the carb off. And that's especially helpful on the Urban Express, where those nuts are very difficult to get to, or at least more difficult than they should be. All you have to do is loosen this Allen head bolt on the other side, and then the carburetor pulls right off the adapter. And it's actually the adapter that's locked onto the intake, not the entire carburetor. So that makes changing jets a breeze compared to changing jets on a stock Urban Express carburetor. Now, of course, as I've mentioned before, putting the Urban engine on the Express, you've got all kinds of openings to get to the carburetor now, so it's a lot easier. And then if you run a different carburetor without the auto choke, which would be any carburetor that's different than the stock Urban Express carburetor, all you need to do is block off that port to run a manual choke carburetor. And by manual choke is you manually engage the choke right here. And actually, if you've got it set up right, you just twist the throttle to release the choke. So that's a nice feature. And there's a spring, a screw that you can adjust the spring for releasing the choke if you take the air filter off. And the other thing about this SHA clone carburetor, which is nice, is it takes this huge air filter, 60 millimeter diameter air filter, at least where it attaches. And I think it allows a lot more air through the system than your Urban Express airbox, for example, or your stock Honda Express airbox as well. 75 jet, pretty small jet, but we're dealing with the Urban Express Iowa Edition engine. And there's been a lot of speculation on how Honda restricted the Iowa edition of the Urban Express as well as the regular Express. And, you know, I think they released the Honda Hobbit in 77 or 78, and then they released the Urban Express in 82 or 83, in 82. So 5 years later, and remember the Hobbit is a moped with pedals, and the Urban Express is a no-ped with no pedals. So more like a motorcycle. Now they restricted the heck out of the original Hobbit by doing numerous things, and which has led to speculation that Honda must have done numerous things to restrict the Iowa edition of the Urban Express and the Express. But I'm here to tell you that's wrong. They did basically two things. One, you can see that square, tiny exhaust port instead of a round, more open exhaust port. And they coupled that with a super rich main jet. The Iowa edition of the Urban Express has the same main jet as the regular Urban Express, an 85 main jet, which was even too rich for the regular Urban Express. I even downjetted to an 82 when I put a People's Pipe on a regular stock Urban Express with the stock carburetor because the 85 jet was still too rich for a performance exhaust, and it's way too rich for the stock exhaust, and it's way too rich for the Iowa Urban Express engine with the tiny cylinder or the tiny exhaust port in the cylinder. That is really the only restrictions on the Iowa edition of the Urban Express and probably the Express. Basically, you're trying to shove way too much fuel-air mixture down the throat of the Urban Express, the tiny throat of the Urban Express. So to de-restrict it, you can do a number of things. Probably the easiest thing to do is just go with a way smaller main jet. And here I am running an SHA type carb with a 75 jet with a performance exhaust and, you know, a huge air filter. And I think it's just about perfect for this setup. And there's another factor which I'll go into later. So that's the carburetor. Then before I was talking about the MLM exhaust, which is, you can see it here. I've never been a huge fan of the urban edition of the MLM People's Pipe, especially on a stock cylinder. It's hard to get it to perform like it should on a stock cylinder, and I'm still working on it. I think it's more of a, I could be wrong, but more of a mid-range pipe than a top-end pipe. I've had better success with the cheap bi-turbo pipe in terms of top-end and really getting the pipe to hit hard on a stock cylinder. As a matter of fact, one of my videos is another Iowa Urban Express that I put a bi-turbo on and opened up the exhaust port, put a bigger carburetor on, an SHA type carburetor, and that thing would hit at 35 and take me into the low 40s. And I just can't really get the same performance out of the MLM stock pipe or the MLM side bleed pipe, but I'll keep messing with it. Part of the problem is the Urban Express, even though it's a continuously variable transmission, it shifts or feels like it shifts at about 20 miles an hour, and when it shifts the RPMs go way down, and if you were close to getting in the pipe, when it does shift and the RPMs go down, then you're way far away from getting in the pipe, and you've got to build the RPMs back up somewhere around top speed and hope you get into the pipe. And this one, the peak RPMs are probably 7,600 or so, maybe a little more. And, you know, the only thing I can figure is, you know, I've got to get it up around 8,000. But I'll keep experimenting with that and report back later. So there is some more information on the carburetor, the engine, and the exhaust. I recently, looking at the top end there, I recently, I sanded down the cylinder head, and I'm currently running it without a head gasket. I tested the compression with the regular cylinder head and head gasket, and it was a surprisingly high 140 psi for an engine that was basically left outside for years to erode and decay. I was amazed at that. And then I removed the head gasket, sanded flat the cylinder head, and now I'm at 165, a little above 165 psi. I could mess with it more and maybe try to go for 170, but I raised the variator weights to 36 grams from 33 and had a pretty good run on it, but traffic was too much of a problem to really let it go. But I got up to 39, and I think I could do low 40s. Now the easy solution would be to just throw a kit on this and be done with it. But for some reason, I'm really interested in seeing how much performance I can get out of this Iowa Urban Express engine. Now, anybody who makes the claim that they got a 70-mile-an-hour Urban Express with the Iowa engine is lying or bullshitting you, because they have put a top end on with a different cylinder, and once you replace the cylinder and change the carburetor, you've eliminated all of the restrictions of the Iowa Urban Express. So don't go around bragging if you're out of Detroit that you got a 70, 75 mile an hour Iowa Edition Urban Express, because that's complete bullshit. You no longer have the Iowa Edition Urban Express. And there was someone on Moped Army bragging about that some time ago, about their super fast Iowa Edition Urban Express, and I'm here to call a big bullshit on that. A lot of talk, and it's really not backed up by the facts behind the matter. It's still impressive to go that fast on Urban Express, maybe kind of crazy, but hey, if we weren't crazy, we wouldn't be involved in this hobby. So, I'll take it for a test run. I don't know if any more weight in the variator is going to make a difference. I could go up to 39 and test it out, or somewhere between 36 and 39, but I think 36 is about right. And if I want to go from here, I could Dremel out that exhaust port, but I'm thinking this time, instead of even touching that, I want to maybe just take a little off the top exhaust side of the piston, and maybe a little off the piston, I guess the piston skirt maybe, and the cylinder skirt, if I've had my terminology correct. But those are just thoughts for the future. And I guess one other thing is the gas tanks. And you can see I added that's a Yamaha DT50 tail light, which was 6 volts, but with a 12-volt bulb. The 6-volt bulb did not last very long, and I realized, whoops, this is 6 volt. So anyways, it's got a 12-volt bulb working fine now. Those gas tanks I got for $5 each, shipped from China, and they are handy to have around to like test an engine, or mount up here where you don't have a gas tank, and a replacement used gas tank in probably lousy condition is going to run you about $100 on eBay. And as you know, I've spent way too much money on this thing already, so I got a little flack for these gas tanks, but they're plastic, they're not going to rust, they're super cheap, they're easy to mount with some zip ties. As you can see, I've used quite a few zip ties. This Urban Express rear fender was missing the front mount, and someone sawed it off, but it was all I had that would work. And I'd like to eventually paint this black, the whole thing black, including that fender, maybe in the spring. Of course, before I put the frame to the engine, I was thinking of sanding it down and painting it, but now I was like, nah, let's just get this thing running. And so whatever. I guess that'll be something to do later on. And then I've actually got an X splitter. A lot of times you see a Y or a T splitter to hook those two tanks in. I could actually add another tank because I have another prong on that X splitter to hook a fuel line to. Then I just installed a fuel shutoff in between there. I wanted to somehow connect that to the rack or the frame, but it didn't happen. It may happen later. And I tell you what, let's stop this here and turn it around and look at some things on the other side and under the seat.